Okay, for the for the American Revolution, basically it's between the British and the colonists in the Americas and basically North America. Yeah. And basically, before this, the colonists were living a pretty free form of government, without any British occupancy and ruling over them until after the French and Indian War. They basically were in severe debt and started taxing the colonists on some rather peculiar things, and they didn't like that, so they started a revolution.
Okay, and then, so the American Revolution kind of caused the French Revolution. It was next. And so France was divided into 3 estates. The first estate, which was made up of the clergy and the RCC. The second estate, which was the rich nobles. And then the third estate, which had little power, and although it was 97% of the population. And so new ideas about the government, serious economic problems, and weak and indecisive leadership from the king, Louis XVI, and his wife Marie Antoinette. Their indecisive leadership and debt all led to generate a desire for new change.
There was the Enlightenment ideas about government and the rights of man, and also
Did this come from the American Revolution?
This was the Enlightenment. Yeah.
Okay.
And from the American Revolution, the French gained debt by aiding the Americans in their revolution. And so there was like rising bread prices and also just like crop failure, so there's hunger. So all of those combined together kind of caused the French Revolution.
So for the Haitian Revolution, it was between 1791 and 1804. And this revolution was started by free people who were exported to the islands of Hispaniolas to produce crops for sugar and coffee, since it was the best climate for it. And there were slaves to 50,000 white people, and were given no rights as man.
And there were 500,000 slaves, and the masters were vastly outnumbered, but the slaves were still considered subhuman, and they were treated cruelly.
And after the French Revolution actually impacted the Haitian Revolution because the slaves found out about it and were given the idea that men are born free with equal rights, and they revolted against their masters.
Okay, so we should probably move on to the first question, which is how are the American, French, and Haitian revolutions similar and or different from one another?
Okay, so between the French and American Revolution, I believe they were pretty similar. Actually, no, all of them were all due to debt and monetary problems.
Yeah, they were all caused by monetary issues. Like the American and French were taxes and debt, and I guess the Haitian was the slave owners trying to make more money, and in doing so, using slaves.
Yeah, I agree.
The American Revolution was also caused and expressed by tensions of colonial relationship with a distant imperial power, while the French Revolution was driven by sharp conflicts within the French society and the 3 estates.
I think the Haitian Revolution was different in a way because the French and Americans were rebelling against their governments, and the slaves were rebelling against their masters. And they were fighting more for their right to have citizenship than the Americans wanted less taxation, and the French wanted a constitution.
Yeah, so Haitian is less about money and more about like freedom and rights.
The French Revolution, the Third Estate was similar, I'd say, to the slaves, but definitely not the same, because the Third Estate they were like heavily taxed, and they didn't have as much say in the government and as many rights, but they definitely had more rights than like slaves.
Yeah, for the American Revolution, they just wanted to be independent and not be ruled by someone off in Britain.
Also between the French and American. The American wanted to restore and build upon old ideas, while the French, they wanted to start new and create totally different ideas. They even changed the names of all the streets and did things very differently.
Mm-hmm. So I think we should move on to the next question. So
Yeah.
which revolution was most revolutionary or conservative?
Okay, I guess I'll go. I believe the American Revolution was, out of all three, the most conservative, because they really only wanted to go back to the way before the British started taxing them, and from the it was still a revolution in that, like, from the Stamp Act, they responded in 1765 with petitions, boycotts, and violence, and for the Tea Act in 1773, they responded with the Boston Tea Party and dumped a bunch of tea into the harbor, Boston.
I agree with you. I think the American Revolution was more conservative than the rest, and I think the Haitian Revolution was the most revolutionary because the people with the lowest social status, the people at the bottom of the hierarchy, became the leaders of the country, basically, and they got their own rights, whereas before they worked for no money and they had no rights.
Yeah, I agree.
Like property.
Well, I feel like the French Revolution was pretty revolutionary because the French wanted to just not at first. They wanted a constitution to write down what rights they had, but towards the end, they wanted to start over and from scratch. And one of the reasons it was like revolutionary was, like, for example, they passed universal suffrage, but it was never implemented.
You go. No, you go.
I was going to move on to the next question. You can go.
Okay. So basically, I was gonna say that we all agree that the American Revolution was the most conservative out of three.
Yeah, I think we all agree on that.
Okay. So between the French and Haitian, which do you think was more revolutionary?
I feel like the French, because even though they didn't get what they wanted at the end, or like they got to like a similar point to where they were before, I feel like it's revolutionary because it impacted the Haitian War, and it gave people ideas of freedom, and in other places it was better.
There's the meritocracy in France, where as long as you had the skill and you could do the job, you got the job. And there was also, under like Napoleon, he ended feudalism in Europe, and like he said there was equality. He wanted like religious tolerance, and you just like wrote down the law and like rationalized the government.
Okay, so I think we should move on to the last question, which is which Atlantic Revolution was the most or least successful? Why? And I think the French Revolution. I don't think it was the most successful, but I think it was pretty successful because France prepared for war and against its threatening neighbors, and they created the world's largest army, which is of 800,000 men, and this was because all adult males were required to serve in the army, and this was under Napoleon, and leading back to why France was also not really successful because they tried to limit the power of the absolute monarchy with the beginning of Louis XVI and Mary Antoinette. And I think this was least successful because they ended with Napoleon's rule of military when the French Revolution ended, and that shows no change.
I think the Haitian Revolution had its successes and failures because they achieved their main goal of eradicating slavery in Haiti, but they also had wanted other slaves in other countries in the Caribbean to revolt against their masters, but that didn't really happen until the 20th century, and their leader after the revolution, Dessalines, was not democratically elected, and he ruled as a dictator. And his harsh regimen of plantation labor on his people made a lot of people feel as if their lives hadn't improved that much since slavery.
Yeah, I believe that the American Revolution was pretty successful as they achieved their goal of becoming free from British rule, and they implemented their ideas from John Locke of life, liberty, and property to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But they also weren't as successful for a revolution because they still only allowed for white males to vote, and many still owned slaves, so they weren't that.
I also think the French Revolution was also least successful because although all the three revolutions were violent, I think the French Revolution was most violent, and that was because of the Reign of Terror and the Jacobins and how they killed about 40,000 people, almost for no reason, just because of like people who were frightening the enemies of the revolution. Yeah, I think. Someone want to say anything else?
Wait, was guillotine like a public execution?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There, you were brought up onto a stand and beheaded.
Yeah, you were hanged.
Yeah.
So were there like a lot of people being executed?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just said
40,000.
40,000.
Like
Including-
every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
including
the
their
reasons
leader.
were like really trivial, like
Cutting down trees.
yeah, it's cutting down a tree that was planted in like respect for the revolution. It was the Committee of Public Safety, and if they deemed you an enemy or dangerous to the country, you were beheaded.
Okay.
So we can end this.